Today we're going to talk about 3 key tips in order to make fasting a lot easier for yourself. And I'm going to share with you Tim's story, who was able to use some of these tips to lose almost 100 pounds. And more importantly, keep that weight off and reverse his type 2 diabetes, letting him get off most of his medications. And it's coming right up. When people think about fasting, they think about 2 main things: how long to fast for, how often to fast for. And those are certainly important, but the most important thing really is to find something that you can stick to. Tip number 1, find a fasting friend. Everything you do is just a lot easier if you have somebody to do it with. You can bounce ideas off of them, share tips, commiserate, say, oh, this is so bad, or celebrate successes. Hey, we've done so well together. But more importantly, you have somebody that's going to keep you accountable. That is, you're not just responsible to yourself, you're now responsible for the other person too. And that's going to put pressure on you and make it a lot easier to stick to your commitment, because we all know how we hate to let our friends down, let our family down. You can make things easier for yourself because you can arrange to meet up with that friend during lunch or dinner. So if you know that dinner is a really hard period for you to get through that fasting window, well, you can arrange to do something together. So the most important thing is getting that support, getting that community. And that's what we try to provide with thefastingmethod.com, pairing you up with a coach or putting you in a group where people can support each other. Because when people have that responsibility to not just themselves, but others, it makes them more successful. Tip number 2, make it a habit. This is really important for the shorter fast, because if your habit is to start eating the minute you get up and stop eating the minute you go to bed, well, it's going to take more work to shrink that eating window down than if you're already used to having no snacks, for example, and only 2 to 3 meals a day. This was, of course, the secret to the weight problems in the 1970s. There wasn't a lot of obesity, and people didn't really think about the diet. There was no diet culture, there was no gyms and so on, but there was no culture of eating. Once you finished dinner, that's it. There was nothing else to eat. If you wanted something to eat, your mom would say, no, you should have ate more at dinner. So automatically, which became habit, is that there's nothing to eat after 6, 6:30, 7 o'clock at night, nothing to eat until 7, 8 in the morning. Hey, all of a sudden you have a 12 to 13 hour fast every single day without thinking about it. And it's because you made it a habit. One of the things you can try to do is push back breakfast time. We've all heard that breakfast is the most important meal of the day. In some respects, it's true. It's the meal that breaks your fast. But there's nothing that says you must break your fast at 7 in the morning. You can break it at 9 in the morning, for example, if you don't get up so early. You could break it at 11 if you want to. It's okay. The key is not to eat a lot of processed foods, and you can always get by with a cup of coffee, for example, or a cup of tea. You can have one of the peak fasting teas, for example. You can have flavored teas, you can have herbal teas. So pushing that back allows you to get into the habit where fasting is going to be easier for you. The other thing you want to do, other than pushing breakfast back, is to try and push your last meal back as well. And that's not necessarily dinner, because a lot of people still continue to snack after dinner. So if you have a good dinner, you want to make sure you get into the habit of not eating anything afterwards. So what you might want to do is build in those habits. That is, for example, after dinner, you go for a nice walk. Not only is it going to allow your body to use some of the glucose and lower down the glucose spikes, but it's also going to be a signal that tells you, hey, that's it, I'm done. The other habit, make sure you clean everything up immediately after dinner. Don't leave leftovers where you'll be tempted by seeing them. So put everything away, wash the pots, clean up the kitchen, and then when you come in, you're going to say, oh, well, I don't want to clean up the kitchen again. I don't want to wash another pot. Whereas if you had left something there, you might just be tempted to snack on it. So clean up the kitchen, go for a walk afterwards, and then brush your teeth. Again, that's usually the last thing we do before we go to bed. But what you want to do is brush your teeth so that you're going to put another barrier in front of you where you say, well, if you're tempted to snack and you're on the fence, well, I brushed my teeth. I don't want to have to brush my teeth again. So therefore, that's going to give you motivation to stop eating those bedtime snacks. If you don't want to brush your teeth, you can just rinse with some mouthwash, for example, which is going to give you a very similar flavor and remind yourself that, hey, the eating time is done. It's now time for fasting. So make sure you make that into a habit that's going to allow the fasting to be easier for you. And the third tip is to put it on the schedule. If you have a period of time where you know you're going to have to cook for the family, cook for yourself, well, don't put that on the schedule. Make sure that when you are fasting that you have something where your schedule is cleared from things that are going to trip you up, like shopping for food, like walking in front of restaurants, that kind of thing. The other thing to do is to schedule something during those habitual meal times. Maybe once or twice a week, you might get into the habit of, say, doing a podcast or doing some writing or doing some reading or scheduling a meeting, because when you're on a meeting, you're not going to be tempted to eat. And then by the time you have your meeting over, well, then it's time to go back to work. And before you know it, you've taken your mind off of the food. And yes, you will be hungry, but it's going to be a lot easier because you've taken your attention away from that hunger. And this works especially well for those of us who are busy and working and therefore can make that into something that allows you to finish your work a little bit easier. It's about knowing those little things that make it easier for you, that are going to allow the habits, allow the good things to stick with you. And again, these are some of the things that we go over in the fastingmethod.com to maybe point these out, to try and incorporate these things, find the fixes that make it easy for you. And it's not about willpower, it's about finding out the problems and fixing them. Tim started off in this picture at almost 325 pounds. And he wasn't happy with himself, so he was able to lose some weight, but he really got some motivation when he was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. He decided to add intermittent fasting as well as a low carbohydrate diet. And by incorporating some of the tips, he was able to lose almost 100 pounds, but he was able to also, with his doctor's consent, cut out a lot of the medications, because the blood sugars, which had previously been high, had normalized. He got off of metformin as well as Byetta, which is an injection. He also stopped his atorvastatin because his cholesterol, which was previously high, also normalized, and he previously had high blood pressure, so he came off of his medication losartan. So this is what's important. He went from somebody who had 3 diseases, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, and type 2 diabetes, and 4 medications, to no medications and none of these diseases, all by adjusting his diet as well as incorporating that intermittent fasting. He credits the fasting method for the continued guidance to make sure that he's on the right track, having a credible source of information, but also the support and the community which is provided within the fasting method. You can join things like groups where you can talk, you can bounce things off each other, and that's really made a big difference in terms of allowing him to keep it off. Thanks for watching, everybody. I hope you learned something. If you did, maybe share it with a friend. They may learn something as well. And if you want to learn more about the fasting, check out my webpage. I'll see you next week.